Okay, you are welcome to today's edition of the MS Project and the Primavera Masterclass. Basically, we are going to talk about critical activities in project management. So, we are going to divide the section into two. We are going to talk briefly about the theory aspect of the critical activities in project management and the practical aspect of how we can identify critical activities in MS project. So you are welcome and let's keep going. So before then, let's look at the theory aspect of the critical activities, or how to identify the critical activities. We need to understand the theory before we move on to the practical aspect of the critical activities. So let's go. Okay. So we are moving on. Now we are going to look at this term, critical path method. Critical path method. When you talk of critical path method, which is the CPM or the critical path method is used to estimate the minimum project duration and then the schedule type within the schedule model. So the project duration, when I talk of the project duration, I mean the starting and then the finishing duration of the project. And then the schedule type, either backward scheduling or the forward scheduling within the schedule model. So the critical path method help us to estimate that minimum project duration. Now, the longest path in the project activities is known as the critical path. So when you have let's say two activities within a WBS, when you have let's say two activities in a WBS, within these two activities, the one that has gotten the longest duration is known as the critical path. Is known as the critical path. Okay, let's see. So the longest path has the least total float. We shall look at it in the practical session. The longest path has the least total float. In MS project, we call it the slack. The slack. You shall look at it when you get to the practical session of the critical path method. Now, usually the longest path is being characterized by 8 zero numbers. So usually within the schedule, all the longest paths are being characterized by their 0 values. So when you see a float with a least number, usually 0, it means that that activity is the longest path. It means that that activity is the longest path. Why? Because its total float is 0. Again, when you talk of total float or schedule flexibility, the schedule flexibility or in other terms, the total float measures the amount of time, take note of this word, the amount of time an activity can be delayed or extended without delaying the project finish date. So the total float will give you the amount of time an activity can't be delayed, or extended without delaying the project finish date. It means that when you have a critical, or when you have a total float of the least number, usually when the total float of an activity is 0, it means that that activity is very critical, and in that sense you can't delay that activity because the total float for that activity is 0. On the other hand, when you have an activity with, let's say, a number of 3, the number 3 tells you that we can delay that activity for a period of 3 days without delaying the project finish date. It means when we delay the activity, or when we delay that particular activity for that number of days, our project duration date is not going to be affected. It's not going to be affected. So we shall look at it when we get to the practical section. Now, the critical path is characterized by 8 zero values. It is characterized by 8 zeros values within the total float. So for any activity with a total float or a total slack being 0, it means that that activity is a critical activity, and in that sense you can't delay that activity. You can't delay that activity. So a critical path gives an idea about the critical activities. Every critical path gives an idea about the critical activities. So per the number within the critical path, that number will be used to characterize the critical activities. So when we have a critical path number to be 0, it means that that particular activity is a critical activity. So when a critical activities are delayed, they definitely affect the total project duration. So in a project or in an activity, anytime you delay your critical activities, it means that at the end of the day, your project duration is going to be extended. Your duration is going to increase. So if you're to use, let's say, 10 days to complete a project, since you've delayed the critical activities within the project, your project total duration is going to be affected. Let's look at this example. If in project activities duration of 20 days, so when you have a project duration of 20 days and 7 of them are critical activities, as a project manager, you are not supposed to delay these 7 activities, or else it will affect what you call the project duration. So within these 20 days, we have 7 of the activities that are very critical. So as a project manager, when you delay these 7 activities, what this means is that at the end of the 20 days, you are not going to be able to complete your project. Since you've delayed the critical activities, your project will be extended. So for any critical activity, the total float or the total slack is equal to 0. So for you to know your critical activities, it means that any activity with a total float or a total slack being 0, that activity is a critical activity. Okay, so now let's go back to the practical section. So open to your Microsoft hands-on project and let's look at how we can identify these critical activities. So I'm going to open to our project lesson or the schedule that we did last week. So now this is our previous lesson. I think this is within our practical section 3. So last week we scheduled for this project. Yes, we scheduled for this project. That is a water treatment plant. Now let's look at this. We've seen that within the schedule, each of the activity has a duration. Each of the activities has a duration. Now, the duration of one activity might be different from the other. And in that case, some activities may be critical. When I talk of some activities may be critical, it means that those activities cannot be delayed. Let's look at it. So we are going to filter our critical activity here. So come to this column, come to the add new column. Now we are going to search for critical, the word critical. So just type critical and select it. Very good. Now MS Project is giving you some what do you call it, yes and no options here. Now the first one is telling us that this topsoil stripping is never a critical activity. Now let's look at this. We have another, although all these WBS are all responding as being critical, but within the WBS we can look at, or we can look through to filter the critical activities within each WBS. So we take the equalization of the basin from topsoil stripping down to the paint and finishes. You could see that none of them is critical. Now let's come to the second one, that is the pump station. Let's look at the activities. We have no for these activities. It means none of them is critical. Now let's come to the control building. The control building itself is a critical activity. But then let's look at the activities. The control building itself, yes, it's a critical activity. But let's look at the sub activities under the control building. Let's see, we have yes down to this one. It means that all the activities here are critical. All the activities here are critical. Why? Because you could see yes for this core footing down to finish walls and painting. Now let's filter the slack and see their values. Slack, or let's say float. We are going to filter the slack. Sorry. Okay, let's type total. Yes, total slack. Total slack. Then you pick it. Very good. Now let's see. When you look at this top cell stripping, you can see that it has 11 weeks. That is the total slack for all these activities. It means we can delay this or these activities 11 weeks without affecting the project duration. We can delay these activities, that is for 11 good weeks, without delaying our project duration period. Now let's come back to the second activity, from precast station down to the piping. We can delay these activities for 15 good days without delaying our project duration. Now let's come down to the control building. You see that their total slack is giving you values of zeros. So as we did in the theory, that anytime you see total slack or total float to be 0, it means that the activities or these activities are critical activities, and in that case you can't delay these activities that are critical because their total slack is giving you a value of 0. So anytime you try to delay any of these activities, their delaying may affect the project duration period. Their delaying may affect the project duration period, all because all these activities are critical, and in that sense you can't delay them. Now let's look at the Gantt chart. We are going to filter some critical activities here. So we are telling the MS project to filter critical activities. Now you see them. You see that all these activities are critical. All these activities are critical because they have a total slack of 0. Now let's see something. We can also highlight all the critical activities. So now let's click on critical. It means that all these activities here are critical activities. All these activities here are critical activities. Now also let's see. Let's come to the Gantt chart. Now this is our Gantt chart. Okay, you have our Gantt chart here. Okay, so within the Gantt chart, let's see. Okay, let's see. Okay, I think we've been able to. Okay, yeah. So these are all our critical activities. These are all our critical activities. So you have 90 days to complete all these activities. You have 90 days to complete all these activities. Okay, so these are all critical activities because their total slack is 0, and in that case, or in that sense, you can't delay any of them. When you delay any of them, they would, or their delaying will affect the project completion date. Their delay will affect the project completion date. So that is all about the critical path. That is all about the critical path. That is all we have about the critical path. So now let's track the Gantt chart and see. Okay, now you see that when we try to track the Gantt chart, all the critical activities are being highlighted in a reddish pink, some color different, this color being different from the light blue color here. So all these activities, or within the Gantt chart, let's view the entire project. Within the Gantt chart, the activities or the activities with this kind of color, they are all critical activities. The activities that has this particular kind of color within the Gantt chart, they are all critical activities. Now, those in the light blue color are non-critical activities. They are non-critical activities. So in MS project, this is how we sort, or this is how we deal with critical activities. This is how we deal with critical activities. Thank you, and then keep on learning. Tell your friends to subscribe to the channel as we keep on moving, and we'll be doing more things with the MS project. When we complete, or when we get to a certain level of the MS project, we are going to chip in the Primavera, so that we look at the section, or the interactive section of the Primavera 2. So stay tuned, and God bless you for today. Next week, Monday, you'll be updated on the channel. So be blessed. Bye bye.